If you've lived in Alaska long enough, you know this place has its own kind of silence. People go missing out here all the time, and most of the time, no one ever finds out what really happened. The cold hides things. The snow keeps secrets. These stories come from the ones who've seen what that silence can do. Today, I've got 3 true Alaskan horror stories, collected from real people who lived through them. These aren't legends or campfire tales. They're real accounts from those who've spent their lives in the coldest, most isolated parts of Alaska, where sometimes the land itself feels alive. I worked as a seasonal ranger in Denali National Park back in 2013. Most people think the job is all about pretty views and tourists asking about moose, but a lot of it is isolation, silence, and waiting for things to happen that rarely do. By late October, the park empties out. Most roads close, and the only people left are maintenance crews, research teams, and few of us rangers who rotate winter watch. I was one of them that year. I stayed in a cabin near Wonder Lake, about 85 miles from the main station. It wasn't much, just a one-room structure with a propane heater, radio, and small kitchen. The days got shorter fast, and once November hit, daylight barely lasted a few hours. You start to forget what time feels like when it's dark most of the day. My main task was checking the weather sensors and keeping the area safe from trespassers or stranded hunters. Not many came through that far north, but sometimes snowmobilers or trappers pushed their luck. You can't let people stay out there during a storm. The cold alone can kill you in an hour if you're unprepared. Around mid-November, something strange started happening near the lake. It had just begun to freeze over completely, though there were still soft patches near the center. I go out every morning to record temperature and snow depth, and one day I noticed deep marks on the ice near the shoreline, long, irregular grooves, like something heavy had been dragged. I figured maybe it was a moose carcass moved by scavengers, but the grooves didn't match any sled, snowshoe, or animal tracks I knew. Over the next few days, I kept noticing the grooves reappearing, farther out on the ice each time. There were no prints leading to or from them, just the marks themselves, as if something below the surface was pushing up against it. At first, I thought I was overthinking it. Isolation messes with your head. You start reading into every sound, every shape in the snow. But then the radio calls started coming in from the other rangers, static-filled messages about something moving under the lake, near their own outposts. One of them, Cal, said he heard banging under the ice when he walked across the shore at night. He joked about it, but his voice didn't sound right. A week later, he stopped answering radio check-ins. We sent a team out from the main station to check on him. They found his cabin door open, snow blown halfway inside. His supplies were untouched, rifle still hanging by the door, radio powered on. They said there were strange cracks in the ice not far from his cabin, long, curved fissures radiating from a single point. No sign of Cal. After that, I kept the cabin locked tight and doubled my check-ins. Nights got worse. I'd hear the lake creaking and shifting as the temperature dropped, but sometimes the sounds didn't fit that pattern. It wasn't just the ice cracking. It was rhythmic, like something moving deliberately under there. I tried to rationalize it. Gas bubbles, water pressure, anything but what it felt like. On the 4th night after Cal disappeared, I woke up to my cabin shaking lightly. At first I thought it was wind, but when I looked outside, the air was perfectly still. No movement in the trees, no snow falling. Then I saw the light from the moon flicker on the ice. It was bulging in one spot near the shore, as if something underneath was pressing upward. It wasn't small either. The bulge stretched maybe 10 or 12 feet wide. Then it flattened back down slowly, leaving a dark patch where frost had broken. I watched that spot all morning. When the sun finally came up, I went to check it. The ice there was thin and oddly smooth, like something had melted through from below and then refrozen unevenly. In the center was a small hole, perfectly round, maybe the width of a dinner plate, and around it, faint drag marks leading under the ice toward deeper water. I didn't report it at first. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But 2 days later, another ranger cabin, this one about 15 miles west, stopped answering too. They sent a chopper team to check, but the weather grounded them for 3 days. When they finally got through, they said the ice in that area had collapsed inward, like a sinkhole had formed beneath it. They evacuated most of us after that. Said it was unstable ice conditions, but no one bought that. Denali's lakes don't just cave in like that, especially in sub-zero weather. I was one of the last to leave, flown out by a small bush plane. As we lifted off, I looked down at Wonder Lake one last time. There were at least 5 of those same bulging circles scattered across the frozen surface, perfectly spaced apart. A few months later, when spring came, I asked a friend who stayed on to help with cleanup if anything ever turned up from the melt. He said most of the lake thawed normally, but in the same area near my cabin, there was a hole about 30 feet across, with no visible bottom. The divers who checked it said it went deeper than their sonar could track, like the lake floor had collapsed into something below. They sealed the site off after that. No public access, no mention on park maps anymore. I never went back to Denali, but every now and then, when I see ice form on a still pond, I get that same feeling, the sense that something could be just beneath it, still moving quietly under the surface. I used to work for Anchorage Public Works, mostly doing snow removal and maintenance in the downtown district. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept me steady through the winters. This happened during February of 2019, after one of the roughest snowfalls we'd had in years. The city was buried, roads barely visible, and most alleys were waist-deep in frozen slush. My job that week was to clear the drainage areas behind the 4th Avenue Strip, a row of old shops, bars, and vacant buildings. While I was shoveling behind an abandoned pawn shop, I noticed a small black camera sticking out of a snowbank. The battery door was cracked, lens half-fogged. It looked like it had been there for weeks, maybe months. Normally, I would have tossed it, but something about the way it was half-buried yet perfectly upright caught my eye. I pocketed it, finished my route, and brought it home that night. It was an older model, handheld, no Wi-Fi, no fancy setup. I had to dig up an old SD adapter to check the files. There were about 40 short clips, all dated between November and early January. The first few looked like a man recording himself in different parts of the city, sleeping under bridges, behind dumpsters, near the inlet. His name, I later learned from one of his voice clips, was Earl. He looked to be in his late 40s, worn down, with that kind of tired face people get after living too long outside. At first, the videos were just personal logs. He talked about the cold, the shelters being full, the people who gave him food, the cops who chased him off private property. He rambled a lot, but sounded lucid, not crazy, just lonely. Then, about a week into the recordings, the tone shifted. He started talking about someone following him. He mentioned seeing the same man across the street near the bus station several nights in a row, tall, wearing a brown parka with a fur hood. Earl said every time he moved, the man moved too. Not close, never approaching, just there. The next clip showed Earl filming across the street at night. You could barely make out streetlights and a few parked cars, but in one corner there was a faint shape, a person standing by a light post. No motion, no face visible. The following week, Earl seemed to grow more paranoid. He kept whispering into the camera, saying things like, "He's not from here, and he doesn't walk right." In one clip, you could hear his breathing fast and shallow as he filmed reflections, storefront windows, puddles, even his own sunglasses. He said the man never showed up in them. By mid-December, the clips got shorter and shakier. Earl filmed himself constantly while walking, eating, even while he tried to sleep under tarps. His hands trembled, and sometimes you could see frost caked on his beard. One video showed him pacing under the Fifth Avenue overpass, muttering that they know where he is now. He said the man had started bringing others, 2 figures this time, both standing across from him, watching from under the same streetlight. He said they never spoke, never blinked, and didn't leave footprints in the snow. The strangest footage came near the end. It was dated January 3rd. Earl was inside what looked like an empty bus terminal, filming the glass doors facing the street. Snow was falling heavily outside. He whispered, "They followed me in, but they don't like the light." He tilted the camera down and showed a lantern on the floor beside him, barely flickering. The camera panned up to the windows again, and for the first time, I thought I saw movement, dark outlines, shifting near the glass, but not passing through. The clip ended abruptly when something hit the door, hard enough to shake the frame. Earl gasped, and the feed cut out. There were 2 final files left. The second to last one was static for most of its length, but at the end, you could faintly hear breathing and the crunch of snow. The last one had no sound for the first few seconds, just a pale horizon, probably the frozen inlet. Then the camera panned around slowly, showing Earl's face up close. He looked calm, strangely calm. He smiled faintly and said, "You can't hide in the light forever." Then he turned the camera, pointing it toward his back. For a brief moment, something tall and dark stood behind him. The shape blended with the dusk, hard to describe, almost human, but not quite. The camera shook, dropped to the snow, and the recording ended. I called the police after that. They collected the camera, took my statement, and told me they'd look into it. A few days later, one of the detectives came back to ask where exactly I'd found it. He seemed unsettled, not by the videos, but by something else. He said there had been missing person reports matching Earl's description, but none after January 5th, the same day as the last recording. They searched the shoreline near Ship Creek, but found nothing. Weeks later, when I checked back, the case was closed without explanation. The officer just said, "Natural causes, likely exposure." That didn't sit right. Earl had survived worse weather earlier in those tapes. He was alert, cautious. He knew how to keep himself alive. I worked the gold fields outside Fairbanks for most of my life. Not the tourist stuff they sell now with shiny pans and guaranteed flakes, but the hard kind. Frozen ground, diesel pumps, generators that break down every week. I'd been doing it since the early 2000s, running small claims along the Chattahoochee River. By 2018, I was near done with it. My body couldn't take the cold the same way anymore, and gold wasn't paying out like it used to. I decided to run one last season that fall, close out my last lease, and sell my gear before the next winter hit. I stayed on a claim about 50 miles north of Fairbanks, old property lines that dated back to the 1970s. I had a cabin there, a basic setup, generator, fuel drums, sluice, and a shack I used for storage. Most miners in that area left before October. Once the first real snow hit, you couldn't haul in supplies or fuel without getting stuck for days. I stayed longer because I wanted to pull one more cleanup before the freeze. The road to my site ran parallel to an old mining corridor that hadn't been active for decades. Rusted equipment sat half buried along the hillsides, collapsed shacks, nothing worth salvaging. But about a week into my stay, I noticed something that didn't fit that description. I was driving back from a creek test site one evening when I heard a faint humming noise. At first, I thought it was my own pump running in the distance, but the sound was deeper, steadier. I followed it through the trees for about 100 yards and found a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the middle was a diesel pump, old but running smooth, steady exhaust puffing into the cold air. That alone didn't make sense. Those pumps don't run that long unattended. They need fuel, oil, and someone checking them regularly. But this one looked maintained. Fresh hose lines, clean fittings, even new cable ties. No footprints around it though, and no lights anywhere nearby. The sound was strange too, off-pitch, like it wasn't just the motor humming, but something slightly beneath it. I followed the power cable running from the pump, expecting to see it lead towards some active site or generator shack. It didn't. The line wound through the snow for about 50 feet and disappeared into a buried trench heading straight toward my own claim boundary. I traced it all the way back to my property marker, and the weird part was, it emerged right beside my own fuel storage, then looped back toward the woods again, like someone had buried a cable through the soil to make it look like the power came from me. I didn't like that. A setup like that could get you blamed for theft or illegal mining. I shut the pump off and marked the coordinates to report later. But when I went back to my cabin that night, my generator, completely separate from that setup, started sputtering and then died, even though I'd filled it earlier. When I checked the line, my fuel valve was turned off. I knew for certain I hadn't done that. The next morning, I hiked back to where I'd seen the pump. It was gone. No tracks, no machine, no fresh snow to cover any drag marks. The ground was perfectly smooth, like nothing had ever been there. That same day, my radio started picking up interference on a band I never used, short bursts of static that rose and fell rhythmically, like breathing. Every time it happened, my power output would dip for a few seconds, then stabilize again. It was as if something was drawing energy from the line. 3 nights later, while I was sleeping, I woke up to a low hum outside. Same pitch, same tone as before. I got dressed, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. The air was completely still. No wind, no animals. Just that sound. It came from deeper in the trees, faint but constant. I followed it for maybe 10 minutes before I saw a dull orange glow through the branches. When I got closer, I realized it was the same kind of diesel pump as before, but this one was half buried in the frozen ground, surrounded by fresh snow that hadn't melted despite the engine running hot. Its cables disappeared underground again, heading toward my claim line. I cut the power cable with my hatchet and waited. The engine didn't even stutter. It just kept running, though the fuel cap was locked tight. I backed off after that. I wasn't about to dig around in frozen ground chasing wires. The next morning, it was gone again, leaving a shallow depression in the snow. When I radioed into Fairbanks Dispatch, they told me no other claims were registered within 10 miles of my area. I asked if any surveyors had been sent up there recently. The operator paused, then said something strange. He said one survey record from 1984 listed a joint claim in my coordinates, but the file had been closed after both parties were presumed dead in a fuel explosion on site. No one ever reopened that license. After that call, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still operating under those old records. That night, I went out again and looked toward the ridgeline where the noise had last come from. No light, no sound, just frozen forest. But when I checked my power meter, it was drawing twice the normal load, as if something else had tapped into it again. A week later, the weather turned, and I decided to pack out. On my final day, I walked the perimeter one last time to collect the stakes. When I reached the far marker, I noticed faint impressions in the snow, boot prints, old style, heavy tread, leading toward the same area where that pump had stood. The prints stopped right where the cable used to run underground. When I dug around a bit, I hit metal about 2 feet down, an old panel, rusted shut, stamped with serial numbers from a mining equipment company that had shut down in the 1980s. Inside, I could see a small compartment lined with wiring and a fuel gauge that still showed half a tank. That was enough for me. I buried it again and left. A few months later, back in town, a friend from the mining office called me over to show something. The land records for my old site had updated automatically. It now showed 2 active claim holders, my name, and another one listed as J. Kellner. That was the same name from the old accident report back in '84. I told them to delete it. They said they couldn't. It was being maintained automatically by an archived system that didn't allow edits. I haven't gone back since. But every so often, when I check the Fairbanks land registry online, that claim still shows as active. And every winter, new equipment readings get logged in under Kellner. They say computers can glitch, that systems reuse data. Maybe that's true. Or maybe, somewhere out there past the tree line, that pump still hums quietly under the snow.